Hey, how's it going? So we're going to keep this Liquid Barn train a-rolling, as it were. Today we have the first batch of their bakeries. I have their baked cinnamon roll, their baker's touch, their Belgian waffle, and their lava cake. So again, disclaimer time, didn't pay for these. Liquid Barn sent them to me, so shout out to Liquid Barn. But yeah, let's go ahead and start. First, I've got baked cinnamon roll. This is a fairly complex profile. I think Liquid Barn is sort of in the ballpark with it. So they say baked cinnamon roll, and I definitely get the baked, and I definitely get the cinnamon, but I feel like I'm missing some of the actual roll. The cinnamon here is actually pretty good. It's not like an overwhelming cinnamon. It's not particularly like flavora rich cinnamon rich, you aren't getting that sort of like dry bakery body. There's a definite amount of like cinnamon spice to it, with a more moderate amount of like actual cinnamon taste involved, which again, it's a lot like an actual cinnamon roll. You got that big gooey buttery stripe of cinnamon down there. This does a pretty good job of emulating that. I will say this definitely tastes baked, which is kind of interesting. It has a definite sort of bakery warmth to it. Like the top notes on this are a lot like the top notes on like freshly baked like cinnamon raisin bread. It's a little sort of hard to quantify, I guess, because usually you associate that kind of baked sensation with really heavy bakery taste, and I'm not necessarily getting a lot of the actual roll here. Like, while I do get like a little bit of like a yeast risen, like legit cinnamon roll kind of note, it doesn't really have much in the way of like a bready body to it. It's more just like that warm stripe of like baked cinnamon out of the middle of a cinnamon roll. There's also something sort of heavily raisiny to this too. And, I've had cinnamon rolls with raisin in them. It's not necessarily my favorite kind of cinnamon roll, but it definitely isn't sort of out of place for the profile. But that sweetness and that cinnamon just kind of tastes like there's raisins in there somewhere. I don't find it really overwhelming. I wouldn't go ahead and say, hey, this is just a warm raisin flavor, but there's definitely some raisin here that you're going to have to work around. It's a really interesting flavor, in terms of pairings. I mean, if you wanted to go for a baked cinnamon roll, my first thought would be going to like Flavor West cinnamon roll, which has a lot more of that bready body. This could bring in some of the actual warmth and, kind of goose up the cinnamon a little bit. That sounds pretty good. Cinnamon raisin breads, that kind of stuff. If you have like a bread base that you actually want to work in, I think this would work really well. It sort of captures the warmth of that kind of profile. I think the other big application for this is going to end up being in tobaccos. Sort of bready, warm cinnamon and raisin are all really good kind of accents to like darker, like non-green tobacco flavors. And so I think a little bit of this is going to go a really long way if you want to go ahead and throw like a fairly robust but not green tobacco flavor at it. Liquid Barn suggests mixing at 5%. I think that's probably a little bit of overkill, just because even up at 5%, I'm not getting like that bready cinnamon body, and the actual cinnamon and the warmth here isn't particularly much better than like a lighter accent flavor. So I'd probably be down more around 2 to 3%. So yeah, this is actually pretty good. I don't know if it necessarily does what it says on the bottle, but I think this is like a really interesting sort of cinnamon bakery additive if you're into that kind of stuff. I have that thing with Capella's Cinnamon Dish Swirl where it just makes me see red and want to punch a toddler. So this would be a pretty good substitute, I think, if you're like me and you just taste like a mouthful of blood whenever you try to actually vape Capella's CDS. But yeah, it's pretty solid. Moving right along, I have Liquid Barn's Baker's Touch. The description for this one is pretty intense. Liquid Barn calls it something along the lines of a yellow cake with a streusel topping a la mode. So theoretically, you got like a cake base, you got cinnamon and sugar going on, and then you have like a scoop of ice cream. It doesn't really come across to me. I don't know. Those more like complex profiles tend to not translate particularly well when it all comes out of one bottle, I guess. I mean, it's fine as a solo flavor, but you can start to kind of pick it apart a little bit. What I get out of this more than anything else is kind of just like a spicy yellow cake. So there is definitely some kind of cake in here. I don't get like an overwhelming like kind of cake texture to it. It doesn't have like the same kind of cake texture that Flavor West's yellow cake or even like Capella's yellow cake has. It's a very like kind of soft, subtle grain. It almost feels a little bit soggy, I guess. You get more sort of cake notes out of it than you do any of the actual sort of accompanying texture that generally you'd expect with that. For the streusel topping, I do definitely get some cinnamon in here. It's a pretty solid bakery cinnamon. I wouldn't call it particularly overwhelming. There's nothing that tastes like weird or off about it. It's fairly well balanced with everything everything else going on here. Where this doesn't quite end up working for me is the a la mode portion. So instead of kind of a scoop of ice cream, I do get like a lighter, kind of like bright commercial kind of vanilla cream taste to it, but it's not, there's not a lot of volume there. You know, it doesn't necessarily feel like a scoop of ice cream. This is already pretty sweet too, so like that little bit of cream and that like sweetness kind of combined for me to taste a lot like the beginning of a frosting note. There's a little bit of waxiness in here too, which I'm noticing with some of the Liquid Barn flavors, and like that light wax and then the vanilla and the sweetness kind of reminds me a little bit of like trying to use Shisha Vanilla by Inawera as a base for a frosting. So yeah, the overall effect kind of tastes like yellow cake with cinnamon on it, which definitely isn't bad. You know, this does work pretty well as a solo flavor. Outside of using it as a solo flavor, I'm not quite sure what to do with it. There's a whole lot going on here. I think you can do a little bit of smart accenting here to kind of bring out that cake a little bit more. I mean, fuck, you could just throw like some actual like cupcake or yellow cake or something there for some of like that texturized grain. I would think like FA cookie is probably a little bit too heavy and a little bit too crisp for it, but you could probably get away with some like cap sugar cookie or something like that. You could also add fruit, you know, fruit and cinnamon gets a little bit weird, but this probably work really well with like apples or pears. That'd be a really good pairing. See what I did there? I don't necessarily know if it would work well with like brighter fruits and stuff. Like if you try to throw a strawberry or any of the berries or anything like that with it, the strawberry and cinnamon generally is kind of a weird pairing. But if that's your thing, this would definitely be a good base for something like that. Liquid Barn suggests 9%. That should be fine for a primary note, you know. It's fairly well saturated there, and I don't think you don't get anything like weird or off about it. It's just spicy yellow cake. As an accent, you know, that's kind of where I'm having an issue, I guess. I'd probably be more around like 3-4%. It doesn't quite work as just a straight cake accent. There's a little bit of sort of yeasty breadiness to that. So it kind of tastes like a weird mix between yellow cake and like something a little bit breadier. So I don't think you can use like a very small percentage of this and expect to get like a holy shit, that's a cake kind of thing. But it does have like kind of a good sweet bakery effect. That cinnamon's not bad. So I mean, you could probably add this at a lower percentage to a lot of bakeries that have a little bit of a cinnamon component, and it should actually fit in pretty well. But yeah, not a bad take on a complex single flavor. I just don't know what to do with it, but you know, pretty solid. Next, I have their Belgian Waffle. Is it a waffle? Pretty much. I don't really get Belgian though, you know. I expect Belgian waffles to be a little bit, you know, fancier and crispier and all that. To me, this kind of tastes like warmed up Eggos. Not even toasted per se, but kind of just like unthawed Eggos. It definitely has that like kind of yellow commercial sort of waffle-esque flavor to it. It's missing a lot of like the depth and the crispness of a good actual Belgian waffle. Liquid Barn says that this is drenched in syrup. Thankfully, don't necessarily get like drenched. There is a relatively light kind of like plastic bottle maple syrup note, you know, familiar from sad breakfasts everywhere, I guess. And then I do get like maybe a little bit of butter out of this, but it's really not particularly rich, you know, and I kind of want a little bit more butter to it. It's just like a very, very thin smattering of butter when really you want something a lot richer. This one doesn't really hit for me. I don't know. With a lot of bakeries, I tend to get like a weird anise note. Like it doesn't feel like the bakery is completely fleshed out and finished. It generally goes with like kind of a thinner texture. I'm definitely getting this out of that. On the Reddit review that I did post, ID10T and Vince, aka Hashling Slasher, did both correct me and say, no, I'm just fucking crazy for tasting anise here. So obviously that's probably my bad. But I definitely do get something a little bit like anisey, if you will, out of this. But yeah, I don't know. For this kind of like trashy commercial waffle style, this one didn't really click for me. Capella's waffle doesn't get a whole lot of love, but I think if you are going for Eggos with butter and syrup, you could probably use that one. That one's a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more filled out to me. Liquid Barn suggests mixing with this at 8%. I'd probably be down more around like 5 to 6%. I feel like at 8%, I'm getting a lot of that anise accent. But if that isn't really an issue for you, I mean, fuck it, go to 8%. There's nothing wrong there besides the anise. So with the waffle, that kind of tastes like Eggos, and there's a little bit of butter, and there's a little bit of maple. I don't know what else you're really going to do with it. I mean, you could probably mix them with some tobacco if you want a really weird breakfast flavor or something. But yeah, as a waffle base, this one doesn't really click for me, but it does work substantially better for other people. So, I mean, if you're super into waffles, might be worth a shot. And finally, I have Liquid Barn's Lava Cake. So right off the bat, Lava Cake. You expect something really stupidly chocolate, something really dense and fudgy and just obnoxious. Not necessarily getting that, but I do think this is a really solid sort of chocolate cake. A lot of the like pre-done chocolate cake concentrates all tend to sort of fall into that, hey, this is definitely chocolate cake, but it tastes like it maybe came out of a box. I think this is kind of in that same category for me, but I do feel like it's a really good boxed chocolate cake, if that's any consolation. It's not the 99-cent Duncan Hines one. You stepped your game up and went like the $2.50 Ghirardelli box, so that's cool. In terms of lava, I don't really get like that hot, fudgy, sort of intense chocolatey lava. The chocolate here is good. It's kind of like a semi-sweet baking chocolate. I don't necessarily get anything that really feels like even like a chocolate frosting here. It just kind of tastes like the inside of a middle of a chocolate cake, which, you know, definitely isn't bad. If you harbor some illusion about living forever, this is DAP-free, which is cool. I think when you go ahead and sort of recontextualize this entire flavor with the idea that it's DAP-free, it's actually a really, really impressive DAP-free chocolate cake. So if that's your thing, I mean, I'd definitely go ahead and look at this one. And it's a darker concentrate too, which obviously chocolate, whatever. But it's not really a nightmare on the coils, you know, even up at their suggested 6%, I didn't notice any like tremendous coil gore. There's not like a ton of sweetener or anything in here. Mostly it was just my wicks getting a little bit crunchy and the flavor starting to get a little bit muted, but you know, not bad. The texture here is okay. You know, it isn't like as thin in texture as like the Baker's Touch or something. I do get some actual cake here, but again, you could probably stand to boost that up a little bit. But yeah, overall, it's really good. Liquid Barn suggests mixing at 6%. It seems about right for like a primary cake note. The chocolate cake here, you could probably turn it into a bunch of different things if you wanted to. It's a good chocolate cake base. Reminds me a lot of like chocolate cupcakes or like the chocolate cake component in something like a ding dong. I think that's pretty good. As an accent, you might be able to get a little bit of the chocolate out of it, but for me at least, I think the chocolate here has that sort of like vaguely fruity baked chocolate thing going on. So while at a lower percentage it's not necessarily going to taste like a chocolate cake, I do feel like it's going to taste like the chocolate from a cake, if that's not ridiculous. But yeah, overall, hey, chocolate cake, pretty good. Liquid Barn's caught some hype on their bakeries. And I have to say, for me, 3 out of the 4 of these were pretty interesting. You know, I don't feel like they're a completely full one-shot like bakery solution, but I do think that they'll have some pretty interesting uses. Like I said, check the detailed Reddit review for more talk about the waffle because it works a lot better for other people. But yeah, overall, this batch was pretty solid. So Liquid Barn Bakeries, mostly a thumbs up. So that's cool. But thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. I will catch you later.